What's going on, Falcons fans? Tori McElhaney joined by Will McFadden, and we are coming to you once more to go over some free agency targets. Now, this is a series of stories that we are doing over the course of the next few weeks as we're leading into free agency. If you haven't already, Will and Taryn Walk actually sat down not too long ago to talk about 5 edge rushers on the open market, or who will be on the open market, who they really liked, kind of the pros and cons for each, why one guy made sense, why maybe another guy made more sense. If you haven't seen that, go check that out. You can find it on any of our podcast channels, whether it be Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcast, all of those things. But today we're not talking about edge rushers. We will be talking about cornerbacks. Now, as we're kind of setting the stage a little bit, it's important to note that some news came out on Wednesday afternoon where basically the NFL informed teams that the salary cap for each club would be between about $277.5 million and $281.5 million. Now, I know I just threw some numbers and figures at you, but basically what you need to know is that from 2023 to 2024, there was the single largest jump in league history for salary cap. The salary cap went up just over $30 million that teams could use. Now you're looking at about a $20 million jump on top of what it was in 23 and 24, from 24 to 25. Again, lots of numbers. Will, can you kind of just contextualize that for the people at home and what this means, not just for the Falcons, who are a bit in the red and will have to make some decisions as we inch closer and closer to the league year, but kind of what this means for the league overall?
Yeah, I think overall, like for players, for teams, this was pretty good news, right? Like when the salary cap goes up, not only does it mean that the free agents this year on the market stand to potentially receive a little bit more because teams just have more to spend, but if you're a team like the Atlanta Falcons, who going into the offseason was already in the red, they already had to kind of figure out a way to become cap compliant before anything has even started, this gives you a little bit more wiggle room. Now, the sites like Over the Cap and Spotrac, I don't know how updated they are, given that this news just happened on Wednesday as we record on Thursday. But, I would imagine the Falcons still have a little bit more work to do to get back to even on the cap. But this definitely helps alleviate some of that from a kind of competitive standpoint when it comes to bidding for the free agents. This doesn't make an impact to me at all because it's across the league. It's a flat raise, so it's not a competitive advantage if all 32 teams enjoy the same kind of amount of alleviation there for the salary cap. So I don't think, if anything, like this means the Falcons are going to be like more active or be chasing, the white whale in free agency now. If anything, I think it just means that they've got a little bit more flexibility with maybe keeping one or two guys instead of having to make these really hard, tough decisions because the salary cap is a little tighter.
I agree. And I will say, too, that this is the NFL informing teams on Wednesday, according to reports. There isn't even a set number. It was a range. And so even now, as we're sitting here talking about it, it could be anywhere between, again, $277.5 million and $281.5 million.
Yeah. So it's like $4 million that they're kind of deciding between, but they'll negotiate with the NFLPA, the Players Association, and kind of figure out what that exact final number will be.
Right. And that will, to your point, make a difference in at least probably the thinking strategically of the Falcons and what they're trying to do, because whether or not there are some cap casualties or if there are some guys that they need to restructure, perhaps this provides enough wiggle room where you maybe don't have to make certain moves that you originally thought you were going to have to in order to become cap compliant. So this is something that we will talk probably a lot about in the coming weeks, because
it's in the backdrop of just the whole free agency conversation.
Exactly. But today specifically, we are going to go through Will McFadden's list of 5 cornerbacks that the Falcons could look to in free agency. And we're going to start off with the first one is Carlton Davis. His 2024 team was the Detroit Lions. He made 13 starts with 13 appearances. Will, I'll let you kind of go over what his year was, but also why he could fit with a team like the Falcons, which, let's be honest, they have extended A.J. Terrell last season. He's locked in for the long haul. But as has been a conversation over the course of A.J. Terrell's entire career in Atlanta, we're always kind of looking at that guy who's going to be across from him. So what about Carlton Davis makes you intrigued about him as a prospect?
Yeah, so a little bit of a background on how I went about this process, like how I was filtering down the guys in my mind, because I looked at the long list of all the free agent cornerbacks yesterday and was just kind of going through that list and then making my own short list. And what I was really looking for were a couple of things. Guys who are still in this like little prime spot that the Falcons have looked at when they've done this rotating cast of like the number 2 corner over the last few years that you just talked about. It's generally like anywhere from like 27 to 30, 31, right? And that is kind of the sweet spot, I think, for that like second or third contract for a cornerback. And maybe it didn't work out at the previous spot for one reason or another, or maybe just that corner's looking to cash in at a new home. So that was kind of the age range that I was looking. And then mostly guys who excelled in zone coverage. A.J. Terrell ran the most zone coverage of his career last year, which I think is indicative of just how Raheem Morris wants this defense to operate. The Falcons were second in the league behind only the Eagles in yards per reception, right? They don't want to allow the explosive pass. So I kind of tried to look at corners who shined in zone coverage, and that's where Carlton Davis fits in. He's got great man coverage skills, but he's also smart. He's seen a lot of football, right? He was drafted initially by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, so the Falcons have some familiarity with him, but he was a key part of why the Lions defense throughout the year, even when they were losing guys, and ultimately Carlton Davis went down in week 15 with a broken jaw or fractured jaw, I believe. And it cost him the rest of the season. But that's not an injury that, like, I'm worried about lingering. I broke my jaw, and I've had no issues since, right?
You're still yapping like the best of them.
There you go. There was a little dig in there, I feel like. The word yapping was a choice.
I love to yap. I'm a big whine and yap girly. Like, that's half of what I do in my personal time is yap.
Yeah, at least my jaw doesn't click, right? You know, so yapping with no clicks is what you want.
What do you do for, like, a jaw injury? Like, do you just have to
They wired my jaw shut for 16 weeks freshman year of college. So I avoided the freshman 15. I was just drinking like Ensures. I remember I got so fed up of just drinking liquid calories that the Chick-fil-A on the University of Georgia campus just kind of like went over there and tried to like fit some nuggets in between the like it was like having rubber bands on your braces and like having your jaw just wired shut. It hurts so badly. So yeah, but again, no lingering effects. I would expect Carlton Davis to be right and ready to go
You'd hope so.
come training camp.
Complications of a jaw surgery. He's like, I've actually lost 30 pounds.
Oh my gosh, could you imagine? It's true. I actually haven't thought about, well, they've got way better stuff than Ensure for players, I'm sure. But he's just been solid kind of throughout his career, right? He's not going to be maybe your high end, but the Falcons, because of salary cap constraints, aren't maybe in the market for like a Byron Murphy, who I think is maybe going to command the top dollar. But Carlton Davis is definitely a big ticket acquisition. It would give them one of the best cornerback tandems kind of in the league. And so I think if you're going to make a big swing, Carlton Davis is my pick for that.
I'm glad you brought up the price tag, though. I still kind of, and you even wrote this in your story because I was kind of thinking about it too. I still think that he may be a little bit too expensive.
I think he could be.
Yeah, and that was kind of the one thing is like when you have, and this is something that we have to talk about with the Falcons just in general, but like when you have so many needs, particularly defensively, and two of those needs are at premium positions that are top dollar. I'm talking edge rushers and I'm talking cornerbacks. Like it is one of those, and you don't have a lot of draft capital at this point in time. Like you have to be very strategic as to who you're going out and who you're paying the money to, because if you're going to go out and get somebody who is extremely expensive, or not extremely expensive, but expensive, you've got to see return on that investment immediately. Yeah,
and how often do we talk about the front end and the back end of the defense being interconnected? And those are kind of the two areas that I expect the Falcons to most heavily invest this offseason. And perhaps they look at this as we're spending a lot on A.J. Terrell, Jesse Bates, those guys. if we put some of that money more on the front end, get some pressure on the quarterbacks, it'll help whoever we bring in at this number 2 spot. So that's why he's kind of the most expensive guy by far on this list. The rest of the guys are more in the affordable range.
Yeah. So let's move forward a little bit. The next guy on your list is Kristian Fulton, and he's 26 years old. Last team in 2024 was the Los Angeles Chargers. He had 14 starts, 15 appearances. I actually haven't, I'm going off of who Kristian Fulton was for Tennessee when he was playing for the University of Tennessee. Gosh, that was probably when I was in college, I believe, because he was in the 2020 draft.
Yep.
So, okay, so it would have been, I watched a lot of what he did in college.
Yeah, at LSU. He was really well-known, high-profile player in college.
Yes. And I really, truly think that what he was able to do at LSU was really impactful. I liked watching him play, even as a young guy. So what about Kristian Fulton is something that you like and think is intriguing for the Falcons?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does start right there with his kind of play in college. And it's something that is a profile that the Falcons have kind of targeted, I think, when you look at what they've done with that number 2 corner spot, or just the guys that they've been willing to maybe gamble on in each offseason. I think back to a Jeff Okudah. I think back to, obviously, Mike Hughes. But just different players who Kevin King probably fits this category, too. It's like former high-profile college star who was a relatively high draft pick. In this case, Kristian Fulton went in the second round. And maybe he didn't pop the way that you would have expected him to at his first stop, but he wasn't bad by any means. And if you can get him for, I don't know, $4 million, right? Let's say that's the difference in it being $277.5 and $281.5 in the salary cap. That's $4 million right there.
Yeah.
Could that be the difference in hey, we could take a little bit of a bigger swing in Kristian Fulton? I think with the Chargers defense last year being in a little bit of a flux transition with Jim Harbaugh coming in and then bringing in Mike Minner and all that, their defense, was great by the end of the year. And Kristian Fulton was part of that. I don't think he shined, but he wasn't bad by any means. And I think
it wasn't a detriment.
Yeah, when you're looking at that number 2 spot, that's kind of what you're going for with a lot of these options. Is just somebody who can be solid week in and week out, like Mike Hughes was last year, and you call it a day and you allow Jesse Bates and AJ Terrell and those guys to really kind of shine and make the big plays.
Yeah. Also, I just realized that I said he went to the University of Tennessee. He was drafted by the Tennessee Titans.
And
went to LSU. I was talking and I was like, I'm not saying what I actually know to be true. So I apologize to that. I wanted to make sure I corrected that because I was like, I know he went to LSU.
Let the record show.
Let the record show. I have corrected my mistake.
There you go.
And this is, I watched so much film. I feel like we watched so much film during this time that I'm like, where did everyone go? Where is everybody? Especially when we're going through draft prospects and everything. But I digress. Let's move on to somebody that you brought up. And this is actually somebody who I'm going to dive deeper into as I'm kind of taking a look at what this group is and kind of what we're doing along the same lines of Will has a group of 5 free agents that the Falcons could target, and then I'll kind of take a step back and focus in on one guy specifically.
Yeah, it's going to be the plan for each of these.
Yep. Each of these. And the guy that I'm going to focus on specifically is Mike Hughes. And this is a guy who has been on the team for the last 2 years. And you included him on the list, which allowed me to include him in my deeper
He's got to be on
later.
the list. Yeah.
I mean, I think that what Mike Hughes was able to do in his 15 starts in the last year, in 2024, was honestly, to your point of what you're saying, exactly kind of what you need from a number 2 corner. And especially knowing how much money you have put into AJ Terrell and kind of how long you have him locked in Atlanta, I think that Mike Hughes is somebody who obviously has a connection with AJ Terrell, has a connection with Jesse Bates, has a connection with Jerry Gray, has a connection with Raheem Morris. There is something to be said about there being a level of consistency at the position. And that's something that I kind of value because I don't think Mike Hughes did anything to warrant not coming back. That was my whole thing is are you going to get a better version of somebody by going out and spending money? Like, maybe.
Yeah, but you're hoping to get what Mike Hughes gave you last year.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and that's kind of the bare, like that's the foundation that you're working off of, and that's why I value bringing Mike Hughes back, and I'm going to write more about it on AtlantaFalcons.com, but Will, why did you include him on this list?
Yeah, I think it's a great player for you to pick to like kind of spotlight because I don't know if he got like it's again the best compliment you can probably pay like a number 2 corner is that we didn't talk about him a ton last year.
Agreed. Yeah.
And so this is a good chance to explain why he was really valuable in this defense. And when I mentioned the Falcons being second in the league in yards allowed per reception and just kind of how stylistically that points to what they were trying to do, you've got to be a really good tackler kind of at both of these corner spots. A.J. Terrell, I think late in the year, like caught a little bit of flack, Washington game especially for that late game, but like, whatever. He's A.J. Terrell. Mike Hughes, though, 66 tackles, 51 solo. Like, he didn't miss a lot of tackles last year. He was reliable. In coverage, he was in the right place at the right time more often than not. Didn't have any picks, didn't really have that many pass defenses, but teams just weren't really able to, I think, throw it all over the yard against the Falcons because these guys were right in the receiver's hip pocket. They were playing well, and then the communication part of it and the consistency part of it is such a plus with a guy like Mike Hughes who has already been here for 2 years, knows everybody, knows the sound of Jesse Bates' voice and can cut through the traffic on a game day to be like, I got to hear what he's saying. Boom, got it, locked in, we're ready to go. And so I think for that reason, he may be a little bit more expensive than he might have been before this season, but the return on investment is proven.
And that's the thing, too, is that I feel as though if you're looking at kind of the names on this list and who's on the open market and everything like that, and you kind of know what you're, one, going to get from Mike Hughes, and two, what the monetary value that you put on him is, I actually think that it allows you the opportunity to kind of look elsewhere to have more flexibility to bring guys in. If you feel like you know exactly what you're getting from Mike Hughes, you know kind of what his own limitations is.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Maybe that changes kind of what you're looking for at nickel. Maybe that changes what you're looking for at safety. You know, I personally think that it's there's
no surprise factor.
Yeah.
It's the known versus the unknown.
Right. And I do kind of value that at this point in time, again, because of how many needs they have. Yeah. And if you can have
you say that, I don't know if they are they're not Swiss cheese on defense. It's just they've got some decisions to make. Right?
I mean, I think that they have a lot of big decisions to make because I think the positions that you need to make decisions you're talking about.
They're high profile positions.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
Sure.
And I think that you're talking about 5 or 6 starters. Like, I think that you could potentially get up to 5 or 6 starters that turn over from 24 to 25.
Yeah, if Mike Hughes is gone, right? You know,
yeah.
So and not to derail us because that's its whole we could do a whole episode on that. Right?
Yeah, but again, they're going to be expensive positions.
Yeah,
and if you can get Mike Hughes back on a deal that helps you out elsewhere, I say you do it.
And more importantly, it's like in Madden when you're doing the scout thing and you've unlocked all of the little things. You know exactly what his traits are and his strengths and his weaknesses.
Exactly. Yep. So let's move forward a little bit to somebody who I will not get the university alumni wrong for.
Better not.
Eric Stokes from the University of Georgia. He spent the 2024 season with the Green Bay Packers. I know that he has not been healthy.
Yep.
Like, I think that's the biggest thing about Eric Stokes is you saw what he was in college. You felt good about what he was in college and coming out and knew what his limitations were. But the first few years in the league for him he's not just been able to be on the field. And I think that's always a big question mark for what you're getting from somebody in that second contract. So for Eric Stokes, what about it in maybe even this last year that you saw from him makes you think that he's somebody who the Falcons could value?
Yeah, I mean, I think in this past year, the fact that he played all 17 games, huge.
That in and of itself.
Yep. That right there, it's like he kind of checked a box that he had to check because, as you mentioned, the previous 2 years, I think he only played something like 12 games. And that was because of a foot injury that he sustained his second year in the league and then kind of off of that, hamstring injuries because, when you have one injury, sometimes if you're not fully healed or you start back a little too quickly, like you're compensating for it and it leads to other things. And
everything's
and
connected in the body.
Exactly. So he showed that he kind of had overcome that a little bit. Now, he wasn't back in the starting lineup as a full-time starter, but again, the fact that he played a full season and he has that first-round pedigree, we both saw as fans of the Georgia Bulldogs how well he can play and be locked in, and he's tall and he's long, but he's not necessarily like the biggest dude.
Right.
But he's still a really willing tackler. You know, he was always the player on the Georgia secondary that was, I just noticed being like a missile out on the edge and like throwing his shoulder into the receiver and then kind of getting up and flexing and doing that. So I kind of filed that away. I liked him. And then on top of that, the speed. He ran a 4.25 40 at the Georgia Pro Day. I mean, you can't coach that kind of speed, and it is a little bit of an element that could be added to this Atlanta secondary.
Yeah.
Got Bulldogs on the brain.
Right.
And for that reason, again, he fits that mold of former highly sought-after kind of prospect who didn't pan out, but we know why. Mm-hmm. And maybe he's a little bit of a gamble, but he's one that the odds are bettered because he would be reuniting with Jerry Gray, who was in Green Bay when they drafted him. And that right there kind of tells you that Jerry Gray probably liked him coming out of Georgia.
Yeah, and I think something that a lot is overlooked during this time period is it's all about connections. Like you do see a lot of times where it's like, oh, if you have the opportunity to go out and get X player because X player is really great and really awesome, and like you don't have a connection coaching or front office wise, then you take them because of who they are.
Yep.
But a lot of roster building is if I'm Kyle Smith or if I'm Terry Fontenot or Jerry Gray, like who of these guys who can be placeholders do I trust to be able to come in and be serviceable in certain areas? And Eric Stokes is somebody who I think kind of fits that mold a little bit of, you talk about the connection with Jerry Gray, and Jerry Gray kind of is a big potential guy. And I think that he very much is such a good evaluator of not only talent, but how to get the most out of talent.
Yeah, well said.
And I think that piece of it shouldn't be overlooked.
Especially, again, Green Bay, Kevin King, like that, another kind of injury reclamation project. And I think the Falcons had like some big plans that maybe never fully manifested for Kevin King this year. But yeah, Eric Stokes is another player that I think fits that bill.
All right, let's wrap this up with the last name on your list, Avonte Maddox, who is 28 years old. He was on the Philadelphia Eagles coming off of a Super Bowl. Good
fresh off the parade.
Fresh off the parade. He is somebody who is a bit more of a role player. And you kind of brought up we were actually having a discussion, and pull the curtain back a little bit.
There you go.
Will and I were actually having a discussion about, okay, when we're doing these 5 targets that we like or don't like or whatever, doing these listicles, at first I was like, okay, you're going to have a slot corner story and then you're going to have an outside corner story. And then the more we were talking, we were like, let's lump them together.
I'm glad we did, ultimately. After like looking deeply at all of them, I'm glad we did.
Yeah, I think we made the right decision. But this is somebody who I think kind of fits that mold of he could be someone who you could slot inside according to what you decide to do with D. Alford, who is a restricted free agent. So I'll give the floor to you. What about Maddox is something that you liked?
So yeah, as I just kind of alluded to, it's not like the best year, I think, for slot corners in free agency. But like I didn't see D. Alford coming when he had kind of a breakout year in 2023 and played really well.
Sometimes slot corners will just kind of like pop out of nowhere and you're like, wait a minute.
Brian Poole, another great example, an undrafted free agent. So Avonte Maddox, when I was looking at kind of the field, he is somebody who has played a lot of snaps for the Philadelphia Eagles. Now the last 2 years, 2 years ago because of injury, this past year because of the presence of Cooper DeJean,
right,
who just kind of took over in the secondary.
Which I think you kind of expected.
Yeah,
like when you saw that the Eagles drafted DeJean, you were like, okay, he's going to slot right into the slot. Yep. Like that's why you went out and got him.
And
but
he was great.
But that doesn't minimize what Maddox was able to do for the defense during his, over 3,600 snaps over the course of his career, which is in Will's story, which I thought was absolutely hilarious.
He basically was a starter there for like 4 or 5 years, and then they decided to bring him back on the 1-year deal this past season. But crucially, like Vic Fangio comes in as the defensive coordinator. You have a change there in scheme, and sometimes, when they draft 2 corners, that's going to tell you something about how the defensive coordinator probably feels about those two corners. But like Avonte kind of took the role, I think, of that like sixth man in the secondary for the defense, but he's a good special teams player. Again, he's got a lot of experience. He did spend a year in that Vic Fangio defense, and there are little tendrils of that scheme in Atlanta here. So for that reason, again, I think D. Alford still would be the leader in the clubhouse because he had an up and down 2024, but as you've mentioned, like they've got holes. They can't spend money everywhere. And if you can bring D. Alford back, knowing about him, everything that you do, knowing his strengths, knowing his weaknesses, you can maybe build out around him from there. But he would be cost effective. He is a restricted free agent. So, we'll see kind of how they decide to go about that. But if they do move on from D. Alford, I think Avonte Maddox, of all the other slot guys out there, he was kind of my favorite to be able to step in on a short-term deal.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I'm really curious to see, we can talk all day long about what we're valuing and how we're valuing it in free agency and what we're valuing in the draft. And
traits, big traits, guy. Only the traits.
Only the traits. We're only trading. We're going to start mock drafts soon. Like, there's a lot of things that are going to be up in the air, honestly, until we get to the end of the draft. But the key thing that I want people to know is, like, what the Falcons do or don't do in free agency is going to directly affect, I think, their draft strategy.
100%.
And I don't necessarily think that's like every year. Like, I think a lot of people last year was like, oh, you went out and got Kirk Cousins, so they're sure as heck not going to get a quarterback, like in number 8 overall. But like, so sometimes it doesn't really matter. But I do think, considering the salary cap situation in Atlanta right now, the holes that they have that they need to fill, I do think that it will be more obvious, at least I think, once we see what they do in free agency. So I say all that to say that we're going to be talking about free agency for the next couple weeks, but we're actually going to take a pause on free agency talk for a little bit because we are leaving on Monday. We're recording this on Thursday. We're leaving Monday to go up to Indianapolis for the NFL Combine, which is basically, I say it's the quarter zip capital of the world because
oh my God, that's amazing.
All of the men folk that work for teams, they all wear quarter zips, and so the only thing you see like up in Indianapolis is men in quarter zips.
Yeah, I have 17 quarter zips I got to pick up from the dry cleaner on the way home.
Absolutely. So we are going to the quarter zip capital of the world next week in Indianapolis. We will actually, Will and I and Taryn a bit too, will be on Radio Row on Tuesday and Wednesday. Tuesday is a big day because it'll be Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris's media scrums and podiums, and they're going to swing by and chat with us on Radio Row that morning. We will have coverage of all of that on AtlantaFalcons.com, our YouTube channel, the podcast channel. Literally, we're going to blow it up because it's going to be really, this is the first time that we're talking to Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris since their end of season press conferences. And there's been a lot of developments that have come to light that honestly they're going to talk about. So that'll be on Tuesday, and then we're also going to be talking to some national media folks, and Taryn's going to be walking around talking to a lot of player prospects. So we have a lot on the table for next week. Will, it's been a minute since you've been to the Combine. What are you most excited about getting back up there?
Oh my God, the steak dinners, right?
St. Elmo's.
It's just Allie and I went to a lovely steakhouse for Valentine's Day, and the whole time I was just in my mind comparing. I was just comparison shopping, and I was like, this is good. This is really good. No shots to any steakhouse in Atlanta. I'm not going to name which one, but no free ads. If you want to give me a free steak dinner, I will say your name on our podcast.
On the pod,
but I just that is, when I think Indianapolis, I kind of think of that, not only because of that, the show Parks and Rec is one of my favorites. So that is the real reason I'm excited. But as you mentioned, it's just the convention aspect of it all. It's one of the reasons why I love to go to things like the Senior Bowl, things like the Combine, even, the one year I went to the Pro Bowl, having people who do this, because when the season starts, everybody kind of spreads out. National media members are going to, you may have 2 at one game, but 3 at another game, because there's a lot of big games each weekend. And this is really the time where I think everybody comes together. Everybody's excited because the draft is right around the corner, and it's the first time you really get the chance to talk like we do every single day. You're in this industry because you just love to freaking talk about football. So for that aspect, I like going up there. But what about you? What what do you like, and then what do you hope we learn?
My big thing is always, like, I love knowing what national media thinks of the Falcons, because I think we're so ingrained in it, and we're kind of in such a bubble because, like, we're in the building and it's all we're talking about, and kind of how the team is perceived from the outside looking in is always something that I find very, very fascinating. And when we talk to national media members or scouts for other teams or coaches from other teams, it's always like, how do they view what's going on in Atlanta? And because I think it allows us to kind of get out of our own heads about, like, the minutia bits and pieces of the organization that we may be super ingrained in, but, like, nobody else knows about.
Yeah.
So I always very much enjoy that conversation, but I also enjoy, and this is just like me personally, we do a Women of the NFL happy hour on Tuesdays, and it started 7 years ago, and that first one was actually one of my first times ever at the Combine. I was, fresh, I was still covering college football at the time, and I remember going, and there were probably like 15 of us, like that, just kind of all
that inaugural class.
Yeah. And it wasn't a super big thing, and now here we are 7 years later, and it's huge. And we've talked about how, like, it went from not a lot of women being a part of it to now it's like women, it's like exploded in 7 years' time. And as a woman in sports, and as somebody who, like, a lot of my friends are working in sports and seeing what they're doing, it's just such an amazing thing to see how big this thing has gotten.
Yeah.
And that is something I think I posted about it on Instagram. Like, this is my favorite thing, like my favorite event of the entire year. And it's not even like it's not a sanctioned event. It's just like the women.
Y'all are just putting it on.
It's literally just the women being like, we're going here from 6 to 9.
So is it the camaraderie for you, or is it the seeing the advancement in kind of like women proliferating around the league and in media and sports media? Because I know, like, that's a huge personal kind of project for you.
Yeah, I think it's both. Like, I'm friends with a lot of people, so, and to your point, it's like you don't get to see them that often.
Right.
So, like, beat reporters in other locations, unless you're playing that team, you don't really see them during the year.
We don't see, like, Jordan Rodriguez just, like, throughout the year.
But
she's in LA.
Exactly. But I, like, hang out with her at the Combine every year because I love her. Like, and I think that part of it's really nice, but it's also, again, it's the fact that it started with like 15 or 16 people in a room to now we're talking about, like, we need to go to a different place because the place that we're in can't hold how many people are coming and, like, who are participating in there and having conversations. And it's also kind of spread out a bit to include, like, trainers and equipment managers and coaches and media members. Like, it started out as just like a media members, like female beat reporters who cover NFL teams, and then it exploded into, it's literally if you work in the NFL in any capacity and are a woman, please come. Please be there, because it's been the best part of the Combine for me personally for years.
That's awesome. I'm super excited for you to get to renew that annual tradition. I'm looking forward to chatting it up with Tony Romo at our Quarter Zip Social.
Of course,
on Wednesday evening, as he and I go back many, many years now.
No, it's like everybody. We have the Women of the NFL happy hour, and then we have the Quarter Zip happy hour, which has to be held at the convention center because there are so many men in quarter zips.
It's held at the 50-yard line, and we stretch just end zone to end zone.
Yeah, exactly. But thank you guys so much for joining us. This has
got off the rails.
I know. We really, the last 5 minutes of this, poor producer Sam is like, guys, wrap it up.
Shout out to y'all for sticking along if you did.
Yeah. But we will be coming back to you guys from Radio Row. Again, follow us on everything: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, all the things. We will be there. We will be on the ground, and I think we're going to get a lot of new information that I'm really excited to really fill out. So thank you guys so much for joining us, and we will see you in Indianapolis.